There is a room beneath the cliffs of Santorini where the sea's breath never fades. Even when the wind above the island falls silent, the air in that chamber stirs softly, like something remembering. Candles line the shelves, their wax melted into forms that resemble the ridges of the Aegean floor. Dust moves as if guided by tides, and at the center of the room, behind glass faintly fogged with salt, lies a single parchment, curled at its edges, veined like the skin of a long-forgotten creature. It is called the Thera map, though no one knows who named it. Some say it was discovered in 1902, after the great excavation of Akrotiri, the Minoan city entombed beneath volcanic ash. Others claim it surfaced later, in the hands of a diver who never revealed the site of his descent. What is certain is this: the map is not drawn with ink. Under magnification, the lines shimmer with crystalline residue, sodium chloride, calcium, fragments of planktonic shell. Ink made from the sea itself. Under candlelight, its geometry appears fluid, shifting as though remembering motion. Circles overlap like ripples. Lines spiral inward toward a point marked not by name, but by a symbol, 3 concentric arcs, the same design found carved on obsidian discs recovered from the Minoan strata. Scholars dismissed those marks as decorative. Yet here, on this parchment, the symbol pulses with meaning. A gate, a spiral, a memory calling itself home. The narrator, or perhaps the listener within, unfolds the story like an archaeologist of silence. They imagine the unknown cartographer, centuries before Plato wrote his Timaeus, tracing coastlines by lamplight. Perhaps he had heard of a land swallowed by the sea. Perhaps he believed the islands we see are only fragments of something once whole. The Aegean was not always as it is now. Before the eruption around 1600 BCE, the volcano of Thera was a single vast cone, its collapse sending walls of water toward Crete. Archaeologists call it the Minoan eruption, but to those who lived through it, it must have been the end of the world. Thunder from beneath, cities erased by waves, voices silenced mid-song. The map, in its strange beauty, seems to echo that cataclysm. The faintest touch of moisture, even the breath of one leaning too close, brings new shapes to its surface, as if it reacts not to light but to memory. Each time the narrator visits, the lines are different. Sometimes they form a spiral of islands leading toward the Azores. Other times, a vast continental ring submerged beneath the Atlantic. Yet one night, under a full moon's reflection through the archive window, the salt lines rearrange into the familiar outline of the Santorini caldera, but mirrored, inverted, as though the island were a negative impression of something greater below. This is where archaeology meets the dream. Beneath the cliffs of Akrotiri, excavations uncovered frescoes of dolphins, lilies, and women standing on terraces facing the sea. Their expressions are serene, not fearful, not grieving. Some historians, like Spiridon Marinatos, believe these murals captured the last days before the eruption, when the island still glittered with trade and worship. But others, reading the pigments like scripture, see them as acts of remembrance, tributes to an older catastrophe. The women of Thera, they say, were not witnessing the end of their own city, but echoing the myth of one before it. And perhaps the map was made in that same spirit, not to chart new lands, but to trace what once existed beneath the memory of water. The narrator travels beyond Santorini, following the map's shifting coordinates. They wander the ruins of Knossos, where labyrinthine corridors twist like waves. In a dim fresco hall, a guide points out a small detail. A bull painted not red but deep cobalt, the color of the sea at dusk. Beneath its hooves, spirals echo the same symbol found on the Thera parchment. To the ancient Minoans, the bull was not a mere animal. It was the surge, the wave, the force that moves beneath all things. And when that force turned against them, swallowing cities whole, perhaps they believed it was not destruction but return. From Crete, the path leads to Egypt, where in 1882 a papyrus known as the Tale of the Island of Fire was unearthed near Thebes. The story tells of a land to the north of the Great Sea, consumed by flame and water. The pharaoh sends emissaries to find it, but they return only with shells that glowed faintly in the dark. On those shells, faint concentric etchings, the same symbol again. Coincidence? or persistence of memory, a celestial alignment with no name in modern astronomy. Archaeologists still debate whether these were temples, calendars, or tombs, but to the listener it feels like something else, a memory of the sky itself, fossilized in stone. As the narrator circles the pillars, grains of sand move like dust through a beam of eternity. The temperature drops. The air trembles with faint resonance, like a choir of invisible tones. The desert, it seems, is still singing. Some fragments found nearby bore traces of meteoric iron, shards of celestial metal, once used by ancient smiths long before the Iron Age. Egyptian records from the reign of Khufu mention gifts from the sky iron sent by desert priests. And in a forgotten tomb near Siwa, archaeologists uncovered a bronze disc engraved with the same alignment as the gate, a double circle with radiating lines, titled in faint hieratic, "The Horizon Before the First Dawn." As the listener drifts deeper into the rhythm, the map becomes less an object than an instrument. The parchment hums faintly in the archive, responding to frequencies too low for the ear. The room itself seems to breathe with the tide. Outside, the sea brushes against the volcanic shore as though trying to reach what once was. The cliffs of Santorini are not solid. They are the frozen crest of a vanished wave. The disc now rests in Cairo, catalogued without interpretation. Every ancient civilization gazed upward, but this gate gazes backward, toward a sky that no longer exists. Astronomers calculated that its alignment points not to Orion, as once assumed, but to the extinct constellation Phaeton, recorded only in Babylonian fragments and erased from modern maps. It was said to represent a sun that fell, a celestial fire cast out of the heavens. Perhaps this gate was built not to worship the living sun, but to mourn the one that burned out before memory began. As the story deepens, the narrator feels time dissolve. The sand shivers as night arrives. Above, the Milky Way unfurls like an ancient script, and the pillars catch the starlight in narrow shafts that meet at the circle's center. Standing within it feels like stepping into the lungs of the cosmos. Every breath a slow translation of eternity. In a way, the gate becomes a mirror. The narrator runs a finger along the glass, tracing the spiral one last time. The candlelight flickers, and for a moment, the sound of distant water fills the room. In that shimmer, the lines on the map realign once more, and the spiral unfolds outward, transforming into a pattern of currents across the Atlantic. Not a route of land, but of resonance. Points of pressure, magnetic anomalies, the whispers of tectonic plates in motion. Scientists call these the mid-Atlantic ridge, but here, in this sacred quiet, it feels like something else. A spine, an echo, a sleeping memory, not of the sky but of us. Our civilizations too, blazing for a moment beneath the firmament, leaving rings of stone and silence behind. We are not different from those forgotten suns. We burn, we fade, we return as dust into orbit. The desert wind whispers through the holes of the pillars, turning the gate into a low, humming instrument. The sound is almost like the toll of bells beneath the ocean, a thread linking all forgotten places through vibration and echo. Perhaps every ruin hums the same note. Atlantis beneath the sea, Lioness under the tide, this gate beneath the stars, all keeping time in the slow rhythm of remembrance. The narrator closes their eyes. In the darkness, the sound grows clearer. Not wind, but breath. The breath of something vast, ancient, unending. And with it comes a thought. Maybe the suns are not gone at all. Maybe they rest here, folded into stone, waiting for a sky that will one day remember them. Perhaps Atlantis did not vanish at all. Perhaps it folded, slipped into another rhythm of the planet, beyond reach yet not beyond presence. Like a melody transposed into silence, still vibrating somewhere under the skin of the sea. The night grows colder, the stars sharpen, and for a moment, between silence and sand, the listener senses the gate inhale. The world holds its breath, and then exhales, scattering grains of starlight into the dark. Perhaps that is what ruins are, places where time paused long enough for light to remember its own name. The gate stands still beneath the constellations that have already forgotten it. Yet every dawn, when sunlight crosses those hollow stones, a memory awakens. The echo of a star that once was, still burning, quietly, beneath the sand. High in the mountains of northern Anatolia, where winter breathes in crystal and the wind carries the scent of forgotten snow, there stands a monastery carved directly into the cliff face. It has no recorded name, no mention in Ottoman maps or Byzantine chronicles. The locals call it the House of the Sky's Memory. From a distance, it appears abandoned, a frozen mouth in the rock, half swallowed by frost. But at night, when the clouds part, a soft blue radiance seeps from its narrow windows. The villagers below say that the light is not from fire or lamp, but from the pages themselves, the pages of the books guarded within. The candles burn lower. The parchment gleams like wet stone. The air is heavy with salt and dust, the smell of old libraries and ancient tides. The narrator exhales slowly, as though afraid to disturb whatever slumbers within the ink. Inside lives the last of its keepers, an old monk named Aristides. His beard is white as the mountains, his eyes steady and untroubled, like stars that have accepted their own fading. He calls himself the archivist of falling stars. His duty, he says, is to keep record of every celestial body that has ever touched the earth. The monastery's library is unlike any other. Its shelves are carved into the stone, lined with scrolls wrapped in silk, and volumes bound in dusted meteorite leather. Each spine gleams faintly when light passes, flecks of cosmic iron embedded in their texture. The oldest records date back to the time of the Hittites, when priests recorded the descent of flaming stones that sang. Aristides spends his days copying coordinates by hand onto parchment soaked in mountain snow. His ink is made of soot and powdered iron, his quills carved from the bones of snow geese. He writes not as historian, but as witness. The falling stars, he says, are not accidents of space, but messengers, memories of other worlds returning home. He leads the narrator through narrow corridors where candles burn with unnatural steadiness. On the walls, mosaics depict figures raising their hands to the sky, catching fragments of light as if they were prayers turned solid. The air smells of resin and cold metal. Every few steps, a sound can be heard, a faint ringing, like glass cooling after fire. Aristides stops before a door banded with iron. This, he whispers, is the Hall of Resonance. Inside are hundreds of sealed jars, each filled with sand, ash, or mineral dust, the remains of fallen stars collected from deserts, mountains, and seabeds across centuries. When one is opened, it sings, not loudly but as vibration, a tone that hums through the bones. He lifts a small jar labeled Thera, 1628 BCE. Inside, black sand, fused to fragments of crystal. This one, he says, fell the night the sea caught fire. Some call it a comet. I call it a messenger. He tells of how the ancients once believed each meteor carried the soul of a world that had died. Fragments of lost civilizations drifting through darkness until they found refuge in new skies. The Hittites built altars of iron, believing the metal to be divine. The Egyptians forged daggers from it for their kings, calling it the gift of heaven. Even Plato, in his later fragments, spoke of stones that remember light. The archivist moves deeper into the library, where an opening in the ceiling reveals the night sky. Through it, the stars appear close enough to touch. Beneath this oculus lies a single obsidian table, perfectly polished. On it rest hundreds of small meteorites arranged in spirals, their surfaces smooth and cold. Some glimmer faintly with an inner light that never fades. In that silence, an understanding drifts near. Maps are never truly of places. They are of longing. Each line, each curve, each symbol is a human attempt to remember, to trace the invisible, to find again what the earth has hidden, or what time has asked us to forget. This, Aristides murmurs, is the celestial index. Each stone represents a fall, not of destruction, but of return. When a star leaves the sky, it becomes Earth, and when Earth remembers it, the sky forgives. The narrator places a hand near one of the stones. It vibrates softly, emitting warmth. The sensation is not heat, but presence, as though a thought, ancient and wordless, has chosen to speak through matter. The monk smiles, hearing it too. It says, he whispers, "We were never separate." Aristias's logbooks reveal traces of real places, meteorite impacts in Mongolia, Argentina, and the Libyan desert. In one, he describes the Campo del Cielo fragments as voices that hum in twilight. In another, he writes of a meteor recovered near Siwa Oasis, engraved impossibly, with spiral patterns matching those on the Gate of Forgotten Suns. The circle closes again. Sky, stone, memory. Outside, snow begins to fall. The flakes drift through the open roof, landing silently on the books, melting into pages as if absorbed by words themselves. The archivist continues his work, dipping his quill, recording the night's new arrivals. He does not glance up when a streak of light crosses the heavens. "Another has fallen," he says softly. "Another returns." The narrator lingers, half asleep, watching the ink shimmer as it dries. For a moment it seems to move, not letters but constellations forming across the page. The entire room pulses faintly, like the heartbeat of the world itself. The archivist closes the final book and smiles. When people look up, they see light leaving. I see light remembering where to go. Outside, the wind carries snow like ash. The monastery stands silent against the void, its windows glowing with a calm blue fire. Somewhere far below, an avalanche releases, a soft thunder swallowed by the valley. And as the night deepens, the listener understands. Stars do not fall. They descend, as if returning to something that once called them home. Perhaps that is what all descent truly is. Not ruin, but remembering. The final image fades. Perhaps Atlantis was never a city. Perhaps it was an idea, drawn and redrawn through ages by those who sensed the pulse beneath the ocean. The hum of a civilization not destroyed, but dreaming. The old monk alone in his library of meteors, writing by the breath of the sky, as the world outside drifts softly back into silence. Beneath the restless tides of the Mediterranean, south of Crete, there lies a plateau of coral and limestone that divers call the Sleeping Plain. At first glance, it seems nothing more than a seafloor scarred by time. Trenches, arches, and rock formations sculpted by millennia of current. But when the light of morning cuts through the water at a certain angle, the plain reveals an impossible geometry. Pillars aligned like streets, mosaics of quartz reflecting pale gold, staircases descending into the silence of a city that once inhaled the sun. For centuries, fishermen spoke of shapes beneath their nets, foundations too symmetrical to be chance. In 2009, sonar imaging confirmed what myth had long whispered. Beneath 80 meters of sea, a vast structure spread over 2 kilometers, complete with colonnades, plazas, and circular chambers. The press named it Heraclean's twin, but local divers called it something else. Ekrion, the city that breathes. The narrator descends with them through the blue hush. The world narrows to rhythm, the hiss of oxygen, the throb of heart, the slow flicker of light refracted through dust. Coral covers the once polished walls like a second skin. Where statues once stood, only their outlines remain, carved in shadow. Yet something stirs. Every surface seems aware of being seen. As the divers move deeper, air bubbles strike the ceilings of ancient halls and echo like footsteps. A dome collapses into view, not ruined, but half luminous, as though lit from within. Its tiles shimmer faintly, covered in microorganisms that respond to movement. When one diver brushes a wall, it blooms into turquoise light. The city, it seems, is waking. Later analysis revealed a strange phenomenon. The bioluminescent algae coating the stones respond in harmonic pulses, their rhythm mirroring patterns of human heartbeat at rest. To some scientists, coincidence. To others, communication. The ruins breathe in waves, inhale light, exhale dark, as though remembering the rhythm of their builders. Fragments of marble inscriptions have been recovered. One, deciphered partially, bears the words, "Let the sleepers guard the gate." Another, "We built not in stone, but in resonance." The language is a variant of Archaic Greek, but the grammar suggests an older root, perhaps Minoan, perhaps older still. Archaeologists have long wondered whether Atlantis was ever meant as a place, or as a state of mind. Plato himself described its destruction not merely as physical, but as moral, the drowning of wisdom by pride. Yet what if the story was inverted? What if a civilization did not drown, but withdrew, choosing silence over decay? And so the chapter fades. The candles thin to a whisper of flame. The sea continues its slow, endless breathing against the cliffs. The map glows softly beneath the glass, as if alive, as if waiting for someone to listen. Not with their eyes, but with the quiet within. The narrator hovers inside a chamber that once opened to the sea. Shafts of light drift through broken ceilings, illuminating reliefs of figures with outstretched hands. Not begging, not mourning, but offering. Around them spirals a motif repeated across the site. Concentric circles, the same emblem seen on the Thera map, the bell's ridge and the gate's alignment. It is the symbol of return. One diver sets a probe on the floor. It vibrates faintly. The readings are consistent with piezoelectric response. A field of weak but rhythmic energy, pulsing every 7 seconds. The seabed itself seems alive, beating in slow intervals. The frequency, when converted to sound, produces a tone low and continuous, a chord beneath hearing, the hum of a sleeping civilization. The discovery caused brief excitement, then quiet dismissal. Funding faded. Reports were buried under layers of bureaucracy. Yet the divers who returned spoke of strange dreams, of corridors shifting, of hearing whispers through the regulator's breath. One claimed to have seen a faint figure, luminous, drifting between columns as though still tending the halls. Archaeologists found evidence that Ekrion may have sunk around 1200 BCE, during the Bronze Age collapse, a period when dozens of cultures across the Mediterranean vanished almost simultaneously. Climate, earthquakes, invasion, all reasonable causes. Yet none explain the perfection of its preservation, nor the lack of organic decay. It is as if time itself pauses there, obeying a slower rhythm. At dusk, from the boat above, the sea glows faintly for hours after the sun has set. Scientists attribute it to lingering bioluminescence. The locals, with quiet certainty, call it the city dreaming. They believe that each night, Ekrion awakens for a single breath, a moment between tides when memory returns to form. The narrator imagines it. Streets of silent marble, statues breathing in starlight, towers shimmering under the weight of the sea. Perhaps the city never fell asleep by accident. Perhaps it chose to dream, for in every dream there is preservation. The mind builds what the body cannot keep. Ekrion may have turned inward, trading motion for stillness, survival for song. As the last diver surfaces, light fades from the horizon. Beneath, the city exhales, a slow tremor rippling through the sand. The waves still. The sea becomes mirror. For a heartbeat, the reflection of the stars aligns perfectly with the ruins below, and one cannot tell which is sky, which is stone. Perhaps that is the secret of all lost civilizations. They do not die, they remember differently. The city sleeps again, its breath dissolving into current. The tide folds over it like a page being turned, and the world forgets, as it always does. But somewhere, in the hush between water and sky, the memory lingers, soft, luminous, unending. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. There are places the sea cannot forget, not because they are alive, but because they refuse to be erased. Off the western coast of the Azores, sailors tell of an island that rises only under the moon. They call it Namara, the island that breathes once a year. Charts mark nothing there, and yet, every few decades, mariners report seeing land where none should be. Cliffs of glassy stone, forests shimmering beneath the waves, ruins glinting like mirrors. When approached, it vanishes, leaving behind only the scent of wet earth and the echo of waves against invisible walls. The first recorded sighting dates to 1811. A British frigate, the HMS Sabrina, reported an island emerging from the sea after a violent eruption. It measured nearly 2 miles in length and rose overnight from the depths. Scientists rushed to claim it as new land. Within a year, it was gone, dissolved again beneath the surface. But local fishermen swore that on clear nights, their nets caught soil still warm to the touch, and that seabirds circled shadows cast by something unseen. In 1957, another island appeared briefly off Vial. The press called it Surtse's twin, but the locals whispered a different name. Namara returned. 2 vanished after weeks. The same location, the same silence. Geologists explained it as volcanic instability. But the divers who went down years later found something impossible. Under layers of cooled basalt, fragments of worked marble, smooth columns, and stairs leading into nothing. The narrator begins there, in the Atlantic fog, aboard a small research vessel drifting above coordinates that should be empty. The sea is calm, but it hums, faintly, as if alive. Beneath the sonar screen, a shape begins to form. A plateau with sharp edges 90 meters down. The divers prepare to descend. The air smells of salt and rain. The horizon blurs into silver. As they go under, the world falls away into blue shadow. Light fades, pressure deepens, and then stone. Vast terraces unfold below, each lined with structures too precise to be natural. Doorways without rooms. Pillars emerging from sand like bones of an architecture that never learned to die. The narrator drifts through corridors of coral and glass, where fish move like echoes. It feels less like exploration, more like intrusion, as if the island knows it is being seen. In one chamber, they find carvings untouched by erosion. Lines spiraling around an inscription written in a language older than Greek, perhaps Linear A. Only a few symbols are legible. A circle within a circle, and the word Atamura, meaning that which endures. When samples are brought up, they defy carbon dating. The composition of the stone matches basalt mixed with something unknown, a silicate alloy found only in meteorite deposits. It's as if the island was built from both earth and sky, one geologist writes. Another notes a faint magnetic pulse emanating from the ruins, fluctuating every 12 hours, the same rhythm as the tides. That night, while the ship drifts above the site, the crew wakes to a strange sound. The water vibrates against the hull, not waves, but resonance. The same tone recorded near the bells beneath the ocean. Low, continuous, human in its steadiness. When dawn comes, the sea is still. The sonar shows nothing. The island is gone again. Weeks later, an old mariner visits the narrator in a harbor cafe on Terceira. His eyes are pale and his hands marked with salt scars. He speaks softly, as if afraid the sea might overhear. The island chooses when to appear, he says. It isn't born, it remembers. You can't find it. It finds you. He tells of his grandfather who once stood on its shores. He said the ground pulsed beneath his feet, and the cliffs shimmered as if breathing. When the tide turned, voices rose from the rocks. Not human, not song, but the slow murmur of something returning. He brought back a single stone, the mariner says, pulling from his pocket a fragment of dark glass. It hums when the moon is full. Perhaps it has been guiding us all along. Not across the sea, but back toward the memory of water itself, and the first silence from which we came. Under ultraviolet light, the fragment glows faintly, etched with circles that shift when viewed from different angles. The same geometry as the Gate of Forgotten Suns, the same pattern carved on the bell's alloy. The connection is undeniable. Each fragment of the Atlantis cycle calls to another, as if the world itself were one broken organism remembering its shape. In the monastery of Aristes, the archivist of falling stars once wrote of islands that sleep between breaths. He believed that certain lands possess their own consciousness, not spiritual but temporal. When too much change disturbs the earth, they withdraw, folding into silence until the rhythm of the planet welcomes them back. Perhaps Namara is one of those, not a place lost to history, but history lost to time. The narrator imagines the island as it might be now, beneath the waves. Gardens preserved in cold light, columns breathing in rhythm with the moon. walls humming faintly as tectonic plates sigh beneath them. Maybe it is waiting not to rise but to listen, until humanity remembers what it once built in harmony, not conquest. The ocean is a patient keeper. It does not destroy, it transforms. And some places, like Atlantis, like Namara, refuse to vanish, choosing instead to become memory itself. As the chapter fades, the sea grows calm once more. The moon rises, casting a path of silver over the water. For a moment, the reflection wavers, and beneath it, faint outlines emerge, towers, domes, and the suggestion of movement. Then, nothing. Perhaps the island has not disappeared at all. Perhaps it only waits for those who still know how to look with wonder instead of ownership. And somewhere in the deep, unseen and eternal, the island breathes again. Not alive, but awake. There is a valley in the high Andes where the wind seems to carry voices. The locals call it Valle del Canto, the Valley of Song. No trees grow there, only stones, vast, smooth, and strangely arranged, as though a city once tried to rise but changed its mind halfway through. At the center of the valley stands a single monolith, taller than a house, carved with spirals that seem to move when the sun sets. Its surface hums faintly, and when night falls, it sings. The first written account comes from 1894, when a Peruvian explorer, Ramon Cardenas, recorded hearing a tone like the resonance of a cathedral bell while crossing the valley at dusk. He wrote that the sound had no clear source. It came not from the air, but from the ground itself. Decades later, archaeologists traced the phenomenon to that same stone, now known as La Piedra Resonant, the resonant stone. There are sounds the sea never forgets. When struck lightly with another rock, it produces a deep, haunting note that seems to linger long after the contact ends. Scientists call it lithophonic vibration, the property of certain stones to resonate when excited by sound waves. But no one has explained why this one continues to vibrate hours after being touched, or why it sometimes hums on its own during solstice nights, when the valley's temperature drops and the stars stand still. The narrator arrives there in twilight. The air is thin and electric. Every sound carries like breath against glass. The valley feels less like a landscape and more like an instrument waiting for memory to play it. Around the stone, the ground ripples with subtle depressions, ancient carvings half buried under dust, forming patterns that echo constellations above. The air trembles faintly, a tone too low to hear but felt in the chest. Local Quechua elders tell an older story. They say the stone was once the heart of Inti Marca, the Sun Fortress, a sacred site destroyed when the mountains split during the Great Earth Fire. When the world ended, they say, the priests placed their last prayer inside the rock. Not written but sung. The vibration is that song, still traveling through stone after 1,000 years. Archaeologists found supporting traces nearby: obsidian blades, fragments of ceremonial drums, and walls aligned precisely to the June solstice sunrise. Carbon dating suggests 1100 BCE, older than Machu Picchu. Some scholars connect the site to pre-Incan cultures that understood acoustics as sacred builders who shaped amphitheaters and chambers where sound and time intertwined. At night, the narrator waits beside the stone. The stars glimmer coldly above, and the valley grows still. Then the hum begins, low at first, like breath behind a closed door, then deeper until the air itself vibrates. Sand shivers. Pebbles rattle in rhythm. The frequency registers near 32 Hz, the same resonance measured in the cathedrals of Europe and the temples of Luxor. The earth, it seems, has its own chant. Recordings reveal that each time the stone sings, the surrounding rocks respond. A chain reaction of harmonic echoes that ripple outward across the valley. When mapped with instruments, they form concentric rings, as though the sound itself were drawing geometry on air. Some researchers think the placement of stones was deliberate, forming an ancient acoustic map that could carry vibration across miles. Others say it is coincidence. Yet the locals simply smile. It is the mountain remembering its name. A Peruvian physicist once attempted to replicate the sound using quartz and basalt replicas. None responded. The original stone, however, hummed even when untouched, particularly during full moons or after storms. as if responding to atmospheric pressure or to something older than weather. When infrared scans were taken, faint lines appeared beneath the carvings, a network of veins running through the rock, filled with crystalline filaments. Like nerves, the researcher wrote, of a body that still feels. The narrator touches the stone's surface. It is cool, smooth, alive with subtle motion. The vibration enters through the fingertips, travels up the arm, and settles behind the ribs, like hearing from inside the body. The sound deepens. It feels less like listening to the stone than being listened to by it. In that moment, memory and geology merge. One can imagine priests chanting to it under torchlight, their voices tuned to the frequency of the earth. Perhaps they believed the world could be healed by resonance, that each sound, once perfect, could hold back decay. The hum becomes both history and hymn. As dawn approaches, the valley glows silver. The wind returns, carrying echoes between cliffs. The stone quiets, as if exhaling after centuries of breath. No one knows what triggers its silence, only that it always returns. Long after storms fade and ships become coral, the water keeps their echo, not as noise, but as pulse. The final image lingers, a valley where the mountains hum in their sleep, and one stone still remembers the note the world once sang. Perhaps that is what memory truly is, not the keeping of images but of frequencies. The narrator leaves the valley in the hush of morning, and behind them, faintly, the sound resonates. One long tone, neither human nor earthly, pulsing beneath the sky like a heartbeat shared between stone and star. Perhaps it was never meant to be heard, only felt. There are deserts that whisper not with wind, but with memory. Between the dunes of Siwa and the western reaches of Egypt's great sand sea lies a hollow where compasses falter and sound seems to fall inward. From above, it appears as nothing, a depression of ochre and light, changing shape with each storm. Yet those who have walked far enough into its silence say that at night, when the wind rests and the stars lower their gaze, the earth hums like a closed mouth remembering speech. It is here that rumors speak of a buried library, the house of the hidden words. According to fragments of the Chronicle of Al-Maharib, written in the 10th century, Bedouin traders once uncovered columns of limestone engraved with languages no scholar could read. They claimed the sand itself moved to conceal them again, as if defending something sacred. In 1935, the British archaeologist Margaret Lytton followed these stories. Her journals, found decades later in the archives of the Egyptian Museum, describe a journey of exhaustion and awe. The desert moved like breath, she wrote, and I felt watched by eyes beneath the dunes. Her final entry ends mid-sentence. The stones are speaking in heat. I can almost. Nothing more was written. She was never found. Years later, satellite imaging revealed faint geometric patterns beneath the sands west of Siwa Oasis. Corridors aligned like a labyrinth, their proportions strikingly similar to the Library of Alexandria. Unlike Alexandria, however, this one faced west, toward the dying sun. Archaeologists proposed it was a sanctuary built by the last priests of the Ptolemies, who fled after the burning of the Great Library, carrying their scrolls into the desert to preserve them from Rome's conquest. But radiocarbon samples of the surrounding stone predated the Hellenistic era by 2 millennia. And sometimes, when the Atlantic is calm and the currents slide like breath beneath the surface, that pulse gathers shape, a tolling so faint it trembles more than it rings. The narrator stands now where the dunes fold inward like the pages of a closed book. The heat is absolute. The air tastes of salt and dusted limestone. Beneath their boots, the sand gives way with a subtle hollow sound. Not emptiness, but cavity. When evening arrives, the temperature drops swiftly, and the ground exhales cool air from below. The desert, it seems, is breathing. They begin to dig. Beneath a meter of fine sand, a slab of stone emerges, smooth, too perfect to be natural. Carvings spiral across its surface in faint relief. Patterns of stars, wings, and eyes, repeating endlessly, as if transcribing light into geometry. At its center, a small circle bears an inscription in faded Demotic. We buried not to hide, but to preserve. The slab opens onto a chamber. Inside, corridors descending in perfect symmetry, walls of sandstone polished like mirrors. Dust hangs in the air like the ghosts of words. Along the passageways stand niches filled with sealed jars, hundreds of them, each capped with resin and marked with symbols combining Greek, Coptic, and something older. When one jar is opened, it contains not scrolls but fine dust, fragments of papyrus reduced by time. Yet when light passes through the air, the dust glitters faintly, as though imbued with tiny shards of glass. Under magnification, they reveal microscopic etchings, lines too deliberate to be random, like text written on particles of memory. The words are gone, but their shapes remain. At the chamber's heart lies a circular room, its dome painted with a sky that no longer exists. Constellations unfamiliar, stars arranged in spirals converging at a single black circle. Around the edges, faded hieroglyphs read, "Here, all voices sleep until the earth is quiet enough to listen." The narrator sits beneath that dome, the lamp's flame trembling in the stale air. The silence is total, yet not empty. It vibrates faintly, as though sound itself is trapped within the stone. They think of Lytton, of the priests who fled Alexandria, of the long chain of memory that chose the desert over destruction. Perhaps this was never meant to be found. In the stillness, they notice something else. Along the wall, faint indentations trace the outline of tablets once embedded there, as if entire shelves of memory were removed long ago. One remains, sealed behind glassy crystal. Within it lies a single papyrus fragment, preserved in resin. The letters are faint but legible. The city sank to keep the words alive. We built our silence into the sand, that one day, when men no longer sought to rule the light, they would find it breathing. A tremor moves through the ground, not violent, but deep, like the sigh of the earth turning in its sleep. The narrator rises, the lamp flickering. Grains of sand begin to fall from the ceiling in a slow cascade. Outside, the wind has returned. As they climb back into the open air, the desert glows beneath the rising moon. The excavation collapses quietly behind them, erasing every trace of the opening. By morning, there will be nothing but an unbroken sea of dunes again. Fishermen off the Azores once called it the ghost hour of the ocean, when the deep remembers its cathedrals. The library does not wish to be uncovered. Its purpose was never to teach, only to remember. And as the night deepens, the narrator feels it. A low hum beneath the soles of their feet, spreading outward through the sand like a pulse. Perhaps it is the echo of the voices still sleeping there, or perhaps the desert itself, keeping watch over the memory of language. When the wind stops, the stars seem closer. The world holds its breath. Somewhere underfoot, the library breathes again. Not dead, not gone, only hidden until silence learns to read. In a forgotten wing of the Istanbul Archaeological Museum, among relics seldom displayed, lies an object that curators describe only as bronze, polished, origin uncertain. It is kept under dim light, its surface dulled by age. Yet when touched by candle flame, it shimmers faintly, as though the light is not reflected, but remembered. Scholars call it the Mirror of Telos, named after the site where it was unearthed in 1921, an Anatolian plateau near the ruins of an unknown temple complex, half melted by fire. The mirror's origin defies classification. It bears inscriptions in no deciphered language, its alloy containing traces of tin, silver, and an unknown crystalline element that resists oxidation. More strangely, its surface behaves unpredictably under illumination. When struck by light, it does not cast reflection, only shadow. The first report of this anomaly comes from the excavation diary of Professor Hjalmar Steen, a Swedish archaeologist who led the dig. "The artifact behaves unnaturally," he wrote. "The more light we place upon it, the darker its core becomes, as if it swallows the day." The journal ends abruptly a week later, with the final line, "The reflection showed someone who was not here." The mirror was transported to Istanbul, examined briefly, and then sealed away after a series of unexplained incidents. Lamps extinguishing on their own, faint murmurs during observation, visitors reporting nausea or disorientation. One curator resigned after claiming that the mirror breathes. The narrator begins in that quiet room, where dust motes turn in golden shafts of light. The mirror rests upright on a marble plinth, its frame engraved with interlocking circles and a single eye at the apex. When viewed directly, it appears dull and featureless. But when seen from the corner of one's vision, movement flickers, not of the viewer, but of something behind the surface, moving slowly as though trapped in water. The story begins with a sonar anomaly. The object has been analyzed by physicists and art historians alike. Under infrared scanning, its surface emits a faint electromagnetic field, rhythmically pulsing like a heartbeat. The field strengthens in moonlight. Chemists discovered the alloy contains microcrystalline structures resembling those of selenite, a mineral once used in Mesopotamian temples for windows of the gods. Ancient texts from Ugarit mention mirrors that look backward, believed to reveal not the present image, but the memory of light itself. At midnight, the narrator is granted permission to observe the mirror alone. The museum sleeps. Only the faint hum of the city remains, traffic distant as ocean waves. In the dimness, the mirror seems alive. When a candle is placed before it, the flame appears not doubled, but inverted, burning downward, like light retreating into itself. The air cools, the shadows lengthen. Looking into it is unlike seeing a reflection. There is depth, not the illusion of distance, but the suggestion of a passage. The narrator glimpses faint outlines. Columns underwater, a circular hall of stone, and figures drifting through silence. For a heartbeat, it seems to show the same geometry as Ekrion, the submerged city. Then darkness returns, absolute and soundless. Historians have speculated whether this mirror was ceremonial, an artifact from the Atlantean migration, perhaps used in initiation rites. The concentric engravings match those found on artifacts recovered near Santorini and Malta. A fragmentary Greek papyrus from the Ptolemaic era refers to a glass that denies light, through which the priest walks into silence. As dawn approaches, the narrator leaves the chamber, but something of the mirror lingers, a faint vibration in the chest, as if one had inhaled the residue of its silence. In the following days, the sense persists, dreams of corridors filled with slow light, of one's own reflection standing a moment too long after turning away. Later, the narrator revisits the excavation site of Telos, now an overgrown ridge of stone above a dried riverbed. Beneath collapsed columns, fragments of obsidian tiles still gleam under the dust. Among them, a half-buried inscription. We made a mirror that remembers the sun, so that when the sun forgets us, it will find its image again. Perhaps the mirror was not meant to show faces, but to preserve light, to hold the memory of illumination itself. Under the morning sky, the narrator imagines the artisans who forged it, metalworkers watching molten bronze catch the reflection of the sun for the first time, realizing that reflection is a form of resurrection, the rebirth of light after absence. Now, millennia later, the mirror still breathes faintly in its glass case, recording every gaze cast upon it, each flicker of curiosity absorbed into its depth. It refuses to return what it receives, as though keeping humanity's longing safe from itself. Perhaps that is why it was buried, not to hide, but to protect the memory of seeing from being forgotten. In 1968, a research vessel named Eurydice II recorded a rhythmic vibration at a depth of 3,200 meters, somewhere between Madeira and the mid-Atlantic ridge. The chapter fades with the image of a single candle extinguishing before dawn. The mirror does not darken. It glows faintly, as if remembering the flame that once was. Somewhere in that silence, light still breathes, not in reflection, but in remembrance. There are rivers that move as if uncertain of their direction, as if memory itself has confused the way. In the highlands of Ethiopia, where the mountains turn gold at dusk, there lies a gorge so deep that the wind itself hesitates before crossing. Locals call it Talamerit, the land that breathes upward. Within it, they say, a river once defied the world's order and flowed against gravity, climbing the hills like smoke. Most dismiss the story as myth, a poetic way of describing a seasonal reversal of wind through the ravine. But in 1972, a team of hydrologists recorded something that confounded them: water ascending against the slope for nearly 3 kilometers. They attributed it to thermal inversion, pressure vortices, or even magnetic anomalies. Yet none explained the direction. The water didn't lift, it climbed, hugging the stone like a living thread. Older texts mention it too. In a fragment of a 4th century Guizi manuscript, copied by monks from Aksum, there is a passage describing a river that remembers heaven. It was said to rise once every few centuries, marking a time when the earth exhales its buried light. Some claim this was a metaphor for the Nile's flooding. Others insist it was a separate stream, a river that did not come from rain, but from beneath the crust of time. The narrator begins at dawn, standing on the rim of the gorge. Below, the shadows breathe in slow rhythm. The air smells of salt and soil, though the sea lies hundreds of miles away. As the sun rises, faint mist emerges from the canyon. Not vapor, but something heavier, like liquid air. And then, from the depths, a shimmer moves upward. At first, it looks like mirage, but soon, the sound becomes undeniable. The soft murmur of current, growing louder as it climbs. The water is clear as glass, moving in sheets along the rock, folding back upon itself in spirals of silver. Pebbles drift upward, carried by an unseen gravity. The scene feels less like defiance of physics, more like memory returning to its source. Archaeologists found ancient shrines along the gorge, their stones blackened but intact. Each bears carvings of serpents intertwined with rivers, and a recurring inscription in Proto-Sabaean: "The path that leads home must rise." Nearby, a copper plaque recovered from a collapsed altar reads, "When the sun forgets its own descent, the waters shall recall the way." Geological studies suggest that magnetic fields near Ptolemairet fluctuate wildly. Compasses spin, electronic equipment fails. Some hypothesize that the rock beneath the gorge is laced with magnetite and piezoelectric quartz, capable of producing localized magnetic anomalies strong enough to distort gravity's effect on fluid motion. But the villagers, who have watched it happen across generations, have a simpler belief. It is the Earth's breath returning to the sky. Every 4 hours, the instruments caught a low, resonant hum, steady, metallic, distant. At dusk, the narrator follows the current to its source, a narrow cavern where light bends strangely, as if time itself thickens. The walls gleam with mineral veins that glow faintly blue. On the floor, etched into the stone, lies a map. Circles within circles, lines connecting mountain peaks to the sea. It is the same geometry seen in Atlantis maps, in Ekrion's halls, in the Gate of Forgotten Suns. Perhaps, the narrator thinks, these places are not separate at all but organs of one vast body, pulsing through the crust of the earth. Each breath of water, of wind, of stone, part of a rhythm older than civilization. The river continues to climb through the night. Stars shimmer above like droplets caught in motion. The sound changes, no longer a murmur, but a chord, deep and continuous. The narrator realizes the water is resonating, singing through the canyon walls, producing a tone that matches the frequency recorded from the stone that sang once. Everything connects: light, sound, flow. The same harmonic pulse that hums beneath the ocean's ruins now moves through mountain rock. It is as if the planet itself is remembering a song it once knew, the hymn of Atlantis, carried in the language of rivers. By morning, the current slows. The water descends once more, disappearing into the gorge as quietly as it rose. The earth exhales, the mist clears, and the valley falls into silence. Only the carvings remain, catching the dawn light, serpents twined, rivers reversed, suns mirrored in stone. Perhaps the river never truly reversed its flow. Perhaps we did. As the narrator departs, a faint tremor passes through the ground. Not danger, but heartbeat. The air smells briefly of rain, though no cloud passes overhead. And in that stillness, one truth lingers. Nature remembers its own direction, even when humanity forgets. The river may not rise again for centuries, but somewhere beneath the surface, in the deep arteries of the earth, The current is waiting, coiled, luminous, patient. Perhaps, when the world forgets how to move forward, the river will teach it to return. There are cities that refuse to be seen in daylight. They exist on the threshold, surfacing only when the air itself becomes an instrument. In the far reaches of the Rub al-Khali, the empty quarter, there is a basin where sandstorms slow as if listening. Bedouin guides call it Madinat al-Zujaj, the city of glass winds. On maps it is nothing. On certain nights it is everything. A glimmering lattice rising from dunes like frost made vertical, towers thin as flute reeds, streets drawn in light. Then the wind changes key, and the city softens back into sand. At first, the crew believed it to be an echo of their own engines. The narrator arrives at dusk, following caravan lines older than writing. The horizon is a pale bruise, the sun cooling behind it. Sand hisses underfoot as if alive. A guide points with his staff to a shallow depression where the dune faces are burned the color of old honey. Here, he says, the desert remembers fire. The memory is geological. In places the ground gleams with natural silica glass, the same greenish substance that once found its way into Tutankhamun's pectoral as a scarab carved from lightning-made stone. Lightning, meteor, furnace of wind. This is a land where heat forgets its limits. When the night wind begins, the basin changes. A low tone gathers, barely audible. The dune edges, sharpened by centuries of scouring, act as lips of an Aeolian harp. Then the first shapes appear, not masonry, but translucence. Pillars of fused silica, ribs of vitrified sand, arches thin as the edge of a shell. They catch moonlight and whisper it along their lengths until the whole basin glows with a patient, salt-colored radiance. The narrator steps between them, careful not to breathe too loudly, as if exhalation might dim the light. Archaeological notes from the 1930s mention a rumor here. Bertram Thomas, crossing the empty quarter in 1931, heard tales of Iram Dat al-Imd, a city of pillars swallowed by the sands. Later, satellite radar from the 1990s traced caravan scars through Oman toward a collapsed limestone sinkhole at Shizr, Ubar, where traders once watered camels on the incense road. The city of glass winds is not Ubar, and yet the stories hold hands in the dark. Both are memories of architecture contending with the desert's breath. Fragments found at the basin's lip suggest human hands once shaped wind the way potters shape clay. Thin shards of silica show grooves and bevels impossible for chance. Each shard is cut to a profile that tightens air into song. Far to the north in Yazd, the old Persian badger windcatchers still draw breath down into cool cellars, taming summer with geometry. Here, the windcatchers stand without walls, organs awaiting a vanished body. When gusts thread their throats, tones unfurl. Low fundamentals like seafloor bells, high overtones like sand striking glass. The city sings itself into being. In the moonlight, the narrator reads what remains like a score. Alleys slope toward a circular plaza, its rim marked by alternating long and short veins, teeth of a silent gear. When the wind swings from west to north, each vein voices a slightly different pitch. Listening from the center, one hears a slow chord turn like a wheel. Instruments confirm what the ear already knows. The frequencies are not random. They follow whole number ratios, perfect fifths and octaves. The same constants as measured in the Andean Valley where the stones sang once, the same undertones recorded above the bells beneath the ocean. As if the world composes in one key and ruins are its surviving instruments. On the inner curve of the plaza, fused into the glass like a fossilized breath, is a line of script. Not Arabic, not South Arabian musnad. The characters are looped and tidal, as if written by someone who had watched dunes for a lifetime. Only one glyph repeats with certainty, 3 concentric arcs. It has followed the narrator from Santorini's archives to Ekrion's blue halls to the gate's elliptical ring, the sign of return. Beside it, a phrase in faint Nabatean, likely added centuries later, can still be read, "We learn to cool the day with harmony." A notebook from a vanished field team, lost in a storm decades ago and recovered by chance under a drift of glassy splinters. Records and experiment. The researchers set brass reeds at measured intervals along a half-buried street. When evening winds rose, the reeds began to vibrate in sympathy with the standing veins. The amplitudes plotted formed a spiral, a pressure map that pointed toward a collapsed chamber beneath the plaza. Cavity present, the last line says. Resonant at 64 Hz. Entrance sealed by vitrification. No excavation followed. The desert keeps its own curators. The narrator finds the collapse. A bowl of darker glass where sand rests unnaturally still, as if pinned by sound. Lying prone and putting an ear to the surface, they catch it. A pulse as slow as a sleeping animal's breath. Not silence, then, but patience. Perhaps the chamber below once cooled water for thousands, like a subterranean Saruj cistern. Perhaps it stored scrolls of reed and leather, long since powdered into bright dust. Or perhaps it held only air, a cold heart inside the furnace, a proof that architecture could make climate from song. Wind shifts. The city brightens. In one alley, a cascade of overtones beads along a row of narrow fins, turning the lane into a ladder of light. The narrator lifts a fragment, thin as fingernail, clear as frozen smoke, and sees tiny striations running its length. Under magnification they would show pairs, then triplets, then pairs again, the fingerprint of alternating heat and sudden cooling. The artisans knew their furnaces, or else the storm did the work for them and human hands merely tuned what lightning had made. Either way, intention sits in the shard like a trapped star. There is precedent for desert glass. Far to the west, in Egypt's Great Sand Sea, fields of pale green silica glass still glitter where ancient fire raced across dunes. One such piece became a king's amulet, a beetle of the sky worn over a sleeping chest. But here the glass stands upright in organs and streets. No random sheet runs this clean. No natural crust arranges itself into a scale. What rose from heat was then persuaded by will. But when they cut power completely, the hum continued, faint yet precise, like bells tolling through water. From the plaza's edge, the song gathers into a long, low vowel, and with it comes an image unbidden. A city not of walls but of wind, drawn from desert like water from rock. Children running cool-fingered through arcades at noon. Sand lying docile at the threshold because geometry has told it to. Women lowering jars into a shaft where day sighs itself harmless. At night, a choir of veins tuning the dark, and somewhere below, in the sealed chamber, a sleeping echo waiting for a season of mercy to return. Near midnight the air stills, the tones thin to threads, then to memory. The glass dims until it matches the color of the surrounding dunes. Without song, the city loosens, panes soften to ripples, edges blur to drifts. The narrator watches a tower exhale itself grain by grain, as if shedding a body to slip back into dream. A last whisper travels through the plaza. The 64 Hz heart note, softer than blood, and is gone. At the basin's rim, the guide taps the ground with his staff and smiles without speaking. In his pouch he keeps a sliver of the city, wrapped in cloth. It sings on some nights, he had said earlier, but only if you don't ask it to. Back at camp, when the fire has sunk to embers, the narrator holds their own shard to the air. Nothing at first. Then, as the wind noses the tent flap, the sliver warms against their palm and hums. Barely. A vow the desert has not forgotten. Perhaps cities do not end. Perhaps they change medium. Stone to sound, sound to sand, sand to rumor, rumor to song. The city of glass winds returns when the key is right and the listener is gentle. Day will never show it. The proof is always nocturnal, always almost. When dawn lifts a pale lid on the basin, there is no architecture, only the bright litter of lightning's handwriting scattered across a quiet floor. The compasses begin to behave again. The horizon goes blank and beautiful. Still, when the narrator turns to leave, the shard in their pocket gives one last tremor, as if to say that breath is the true building material, and harmony the only mortar that lasts. Perhaps it was never meant to be lived in. Perhaps it was meant to teach the living how to breathe. There are stories that return like tides, each time leaving a brighter film upon the shore. The tale of the Crystal Towers is one of them, whispered by sailors who chart the Azores by starlight, by divers whose lamps falter over pavements too precise for chance, by archivists who hear a low note in their bones when they touch old glass. It is not a single city, they say, but a way of building light. And once, before the sea forgot its gentleness, there were towers that rose from the mid-Atlantic like organ pipes of dawn. The narrator begins at the edge of a weathered quay in Madeira, where fishermen speak softly after dark. A man with salt-white hair opens his palm to reveal a shard the size of a fingernail, clear, shot through with hair-thin filaments. Under the moon it glows faintly, not with reflection but with an inner patience. From the line west of Flores, he murmurs. A net tore on something upright. The sea kept most of it. This is what it allowed. Laboratory notes, fragile with salt, say the shard is silica-rich, threaded with microscopic quartz needles set in parallel orientations. When placed between copper plates and breathed upon, it exudes a measurable current, not strong but steady. Piezoelectric as the mountain crystals of Anatolia, yet different. The filaments are braided like muscle, as though designed to carry rhythm, not merely charge. A scrawl in the margin reads, "Architecture that listens." The sound was never fully explained. The journey follows currents and rumors. Off Terceira, sonar prints a pale geometry. Ribs, arcs, voids, then fails as if embarrassed by the very shape it revealed. A week later, a storm clears the thermocline and the sea stands briefly transparent. Through the boat's shadow, the narrator glimpses it. A rank of verticals descending into cobalt, each column faceted like a giant prism, each base anchored in terraces of pale stone. No growth crowds their faces. Fish move around them as birds circle bells. Divers descend. The world narrows to pulse and light. What seemed glass is not glass but something harder, smoother, more patient. A crystal composite grown, perhaps, rather than cast. Along each tower run shallow channels, as if for water or wind. Set at intervals on the lee side are plates no thicker than a shell, tuned to catch current and translated into tone. The city below, if city is the word, is arranged in spirals and circles, a grammar of return. In its middle, a plaza opens like an eye, and from that pupil rises the highest tower, veiled in the faintest phosphorescence, breathing by imperceptible degrees. Archaeology prefers shards you can catalog, dates you can argue into obedience. Yet here the evidence argues in wavelengths. A hydrophone fixed to a column picks up a chord too low to hear, stable at 64 Hz, with harmonics in fifths and octaves, the same language spoken by the bells beneath the ocean, by the stone that sang once, by the city of glass winds when the night is kind. When the current changes, the chord leans, then rights itself like a sailor adjusting for swell. There are marks where tools once kissed crystal. They are not chisel bites, not saw lines. Under magnification, the striations look like the wake of focused heat, as if sunlight itself, concentrated by mirrors, engraved the faces. Beside one seam lies a sliver of a different substance, copper gold and warm even in cold water. Analyses later call it brass with impurities, but to the diverse it looks like the legend of orichalcum dreamed into metal. On its edge, half eroded, 3 arches curve within one another, the old sign repeating, the vow of return. A journal preserved in the Portuguese Navy archives recalls a 1904 cable repair ship whose crew saw towers like ice at dawn before fog consumed them. A captain sketched what memory could hold. Colonnades, ramps, a lantern at the summit of the central spire. He swore the light did not spill outward, it drew inward, as if the tower were drinking day. The page smells faintly of brine and camphor. Someone has written later, in pencil, photovoltaic before the word existed. Another hand has answered, softer, liturgical, not technological. The narrator enters a chamber at the base of the main spire. It is not a room. It is a throat. Ribs of crystal climb around a core void where water moves without turbulence. Suspended in that clear column are wands of translucent stone, each precisely angled. When a swell passes above, pressure shifts. The wands tremble. A tone lifts into the bones. The floor is a ring of pale plates set like petals. Stepping between them is like walking a keyboard made for tides. In the faint glow, the plates reveal inlaid threads of silver and a darker metal, running not as decoration but as veins. A city wired to the sea, not to burn, but to breathe. Fragments of inscription survive where the spiral stairs begin to fail. The script curves like seagrass in current. The words that can be coaxed from it are few and simple. Light, choir, water, sleep, keep, remember. On one panel, scratched later in a more familiar hand, a different sentence runs, cautious and small. We learn to cool the sun. Scholars will say cooling is impossible. Better to say rephrased. The towers seem made to translate. Sunlight into slowness, current into chord, heat into the patience of shade. Around the perimeter of the plaza stand low colonnades whose capitals hold shallow cups. When the divers brush them, a powder fine as frost lifts in the beam. Collected, it proves to be calcite laced with a trace of rare earths, the kind that make light soft and white. Perhaps the city-tinted day the way stained glass teaches noon to become a chapel. Perhaps it bent heat into harmony and fed it down into cisterns, so that water, not flame, ruled the hour. No bodies remain, no household bowls, no tools left in haste. The place does not look abandoned. It looks completed. The spiral ends where it intends to end. The last plate is placed like a closing note. What came next was not flight but folding. The sea rose or the city lowered itself by knowing how. The terraces accept silt the way a palm accepts rain. The towers do not resist. They lean into blue like tall grass learning a new wind. At night on the boat, the narrator sits with an old monk's notebook rescued long ago from snowed Anatolia. In its neat hand Aristes had written, "There are architectures that descend to survive." He listed deserts that sing, gates that mourn vanished suns, rivers that climb to remember. At the margin a thumbprint darkens the page where he added, "Atlantis was never a place. It was a tuning." Geologists suggested underwater gas vents. Oceanographers thought of shifting tectonic plates. The final dive is brief. Weather turns, instruments complain, the ocean asks for quiet. Before leaving, the narrator swims once around the central spire. For a moment the clouds thin and a shaft of afternoon reaches down like a bell rope, catches a bevel, splits into colors, and travels the column. Reds fade first, then gold, then a blue so soft the heart slows to meet it. The whole tower answers with a tone the body confuses with breath. In that tone is neither triumph nor warning. It is an instruction so old that language forgot it. Be slow, be clear, return. They surface into rain. The sea erases its own handwriting. Swell covers the terraces. The screen goes blind. On deck, the shard from the fisherman warms in the narrator's palm. It does not glow. It listens. The engine starts, and the sound it makes is clumsy beside the cord still living in the ribs. Perhaps the towers did not fall. Perhaps they became the patience of water, the kindness of shade, the art by which noon remembers evening. Perhaps every harbor that has ever calmed a mind carries one lesson from their design. The chapter fades with a shore unseen, a lantern that drinks daylight, and a city that chose to live by learning to sleep. If one stands very still at midnight on a west-facing cliff, the horizon sometimes brightens without a ship. It is only the last light of the crystal towers returning for a breath, rounding the world like a slow, clear tide. Perhaps it was never meant to be discovered, only to remind us how to become quiet enough to see. There are oracles that never spoke in words. They murmured through erosion, through the slow argument between land and sea. Along the Mauritanian coast, where the desert dips into the Atlantic like a bowed shoulder, lies a ring of stone older than any alphabet. The Rikhat structure, called by geologists a dome, by mystics a fingerprint of the gods. From the air it is a ripple of the earth itself, 15 kilometers wide. A vast spiral pressed into the Sahara as though the planet once tried to remember its own heartbeat. The narrator stands at dawn upon the outer rim. The wind tastes of salt and sand, and every gust carries both dryness and the memory of water. The horizon is curved with haze. In the east, dunes gleam like embers. In the west, the ocean breathes its mist. Between them lies this impossible geometry, circles of limestone and quartz, alternating like a buried labyrinth. To most it is a geological curiosity, a collapsed dome carved by erosion. To others, it is the outline of something remembered by the sea itself. Local tales speak of a city that spun, not with wheels, but with seasons. Its foundations, they say, turned slowly with the earth, aligning to equinox and tide. When arrogance outpaced wisdom, the ocean reclaimed it, leaving only its mark on the sand. Whether myth or memory, the symmetry endures. Every ridge sings in a different tone when the wind crosses it, as if the desert were playing a forgotten chord. Archaeological surveys in the 1960s found traces of ancient habitation on the periphery, shards of pottery glazed with marine salt, fish bones among quartz pebbles hundreds of kilometers from the coast. Later, radar imaging revealed subsurface channels, dry riverbeds looping inward toward the structure's heart, suggesting that water once spiraled here. The desert was not always desert. It was a sea that learned stillness. But one of the researchers, a quiet man named Alain Duval, disagreed. At midday, the narrator walks toward the center. Heat blurs the air. Shadows curl at the edges of stones. In the innermost ring, among shattered columns, a basin remains, its surface smooth as if worn by centuries of turning water. Embedded within it is a disk of black basalt, carved with shallow spirals and punctuated by 12 small depressions, each holding dust finer than ash. When the wind moves, the dust dances, forming small vortices that rise and vanish. To the ear pressed close, the movement hums faintly, like the memory of surf. Older records tell of caravans that avoided this basin. Their guides claimed the place spoke when the moon was full, a low sound that traveled through the sand for miles. In 1932, a French prospector camping nearby noted his compass spinning at midnight, then freezing as the earth trembled briefly beneath him. He wrote, "The air seemed to breathe through the stones, as if the desert exhaled." He did not return. Scientists attribute the magnetism to iron oxide and groundwater trapped beneath quartz. But the narrator senses something else, a rhythm too measured to be accident. Kneeling, they sift the dust between their fingers. It feels neither dry nor wet, but alive, like powder that remembers being wave. Mixed within it are fragments of shells turned to glass. Under magnification, each shell bears microscopic lines, spiral carvings repeating the pattern of the basin itself. The same motif, scaled endlessly, as though the sea tried to copy its own design until silence carried it inward. When night descends, the temperature falls sharply. Stars bloom across the sky like salt on dark cloth. The wind dies. Then, faintly, the sand begins to whisper. Not rustle, whisper. A deep subsonic vibration that can be felt more than heard. Around the basin, dust lifts in threads, circling the depressions as if answering a call. The basalt disk vibrates. Grain by grain, light stirs where none should be. Faint blue luminescence, as if bioluminescent plankton had returned to their ancestral home. The narrator realizes this is the oracle the ancients spoke of. Not a voice that foretold, but a memory that replays. The ocean still lives here, folded beneath its own absence. Each gust of wind becomes translation. Each grain of dust, a syllable of water. The earth, through erosion, recites its own scripture. In that silence, one can almost hear the first tides learning rhythm. The moon's long conversation with the shore, the dialogue that shaped both continents and hearts. The Rick-Hat is not prophecy. It is remembrance carved into crust. At the center of the basin lies a small cavity. The narrator lowers a hand and feels cool air rising from within, impossibly cool in a landscape where heat reigns. The air smells faintly of salt, though no sea stands nearby. Beneath layers of quartz and sand, perhaps an ancient aquifer still dreams. Or perhaps something older, an echo that never learned to stop. Before leaving, the narrator places a shell fragment upon the basalt. For a moment the dust swirls, then settles. The hum softens, like breath finishing a prayer. The stars above pulse gently, their light refracted by the haze until each circle of the structure gleams with a pale aureole. Perhaps the oracle never meant to predict the future. Perhaps its task was to remind the sea how to return. The desert, after all, is only water paused long enough to turn to glass. As dawn spreads its first rose along the rim, the spiral glows briefly, tenderly, as if greeting the sun it once mirrored from below. The narrator watches until the light fades, leaving only stone and wind and the slow remembering of dust. He noticed that the tones formed intervals, perfect fifths, octaves, minor thirds. Perhaps every prophecy is only the earth trying to recall the sound of its own beginning. There is a hush the sea keeps for its oldest rooms. It gathers at the edge of evening, in the brief hour when the surface lies like tempered glass and the gulls fall silent, as if rehearsing a reverence learned from older congregations. In the strait between Kythera and the Laconian coast, where Pavlopetri's streets sleep under ribbons of sand, fishermen speak of a darker hollowness farther out. A vault felt before it is seen, a space that steadies the heart the way a long nave steadies footsteps. They call it simply the cathedral. Not built, they say, but invited. Not raised from stone, but allowed by water. The narrator begins at dawn on a small research boat, its hull ticking with the cooling of night. Beyond the shallows where Pavlopetri's grid still answers to sunlight, the seabed falls away in terraces of limestone and basalt. Sonar draws an outline, a great oval more than 100 meters long, ribbed with parallel shadows. The technologist frowns. The image looks like a basilica plan translated by pressure and tide. A cross-axis interrupts the length. The central bay widens. Along the flanks, alcoves open like side chapels. It is too clean to be chance, too salt-soft to be modern.
Divers descend.
The world narrows to the clock of breath and the tilt of light. At 15 meters, eelgrass gives way to a field of broken columns lying like felled reeds. At 20, the water cools. Sound thickens. Then the space reveals itself. A great barrel void roofed by stone, its ceiling scalloped with parallel grooves like organ pipes petrified mid-him. It is not a cave in the ordinary sense. The walls are worked smooth in places, rough in others, as if the sea could only finish what hands began. Along the floor, flagstones show their edges. Between them, sea fern grows like green incense. The first impression is not visual. It is tactile. Pressure settles evenly across the chest, the way music settles in a nave. The ear registers a persistent tone near the limit of hearing. When a surge passes the outer arch, a chord gathers, low fundamentals at 64 Hz, rising into fifths and octaves as eddies brush the ribs. The cathedral sings itself, as if remembering the voice that once taught it to hold silence. Archaeological notes, fragile with brine, tell of earlier visits. In 1968, when Pavlopetri was first mapped, a diver from Neapolis swore he had found a church without saints in deeper water. Vault, colonnade, a stone table rimmed with copper. His sketch shows a long hall with transept and apse, its measures close to early basilicas at Nicopolis and Salona. Later expeditions marked the place but could not linger. Weather changes quickly here, and the sea keeps its schedules. Light factual traces survive. Amphora fragments lettered in a Roman hand lie near the north alcove. A slab with a faint chiro, perhaps later, is half buried beneath calcified sponge. To the south, a marble block bears a groove polished by centuries of touch. And there is metal. Thin plates like leaves, green with age, pinned under crusts of coral. Brass, likely, though some tests suggest an alloy with odd impurities. Along one bent edge, the old emblem returns, 3 crescents nested within one another, the vow of return. The narrator fin kicks along the nave, careful not to stir the sand. Above, the ceiling ribs flare and contract like frozen breath. Their spacing is not random. It tightens toward the apse, as if to focus sound. In Gothic cathedrals, vaults gather resonance into notes the body remembers as peace. Here, water plays the stone and stone answers with patience. The diver taps a rib with a finger. The whole room answers, a soft, traveling pulse that takes seconds to settle. The sea, satisfied, smooths the tone into a single, breathing vowel. At the crossing, a platform rises, not altar, not dais, something between. Its surface is inlaid with a mosaic of pale tesserae now blurred by salt. Under a film of silt, the pattern emerges. spirals feeding one another, lines that arc from corner to center, a geometry of arrival. In the middle, a shallow bowl is cut into the stone. It is lined with a crust that fluoresces faintly when a torch passes, a film of calcium and rare earth trace, the same softening dust found in the last light of the crystal towers. A place to cool fire, to turn noon into evening. Underwater, it cools memory. Some scholars have argued the cathedral began as a lava tube reworked by late Roman hands into a maritime store or shrine. Others say it is entirely natural, a music chamber carved by vortices in 1,000 winter storms. Yet the evidence keeps complicating the tidy. On the north aisle wall, a lintel stone is scored with dress tool striations that match early Byzantine cutting. On a capital fallen near the south alcove, a vine scroll still curls, too delicate for whim. And at the west portal, a door threshold lies where a door would wish to be, its sill worn into two long hollows where thousands of feet might have stepped if feet belonged here. They followed musical ratios, not geological chaos. The cathedral is a ledger of mingled intentions. Tectonic, tidal, human. It is a conversation caught mid-sentence between rock and prayer and the rule of water. The narrator rests, neutrally buoyant in the transept, while motes drift through light like ash in a slow-lit thurible. The undertone deepens. A school of horse mackerel turns as one, their bellies throwing silver into the ribs. The place neither startles nor sleeps. It abides. From the apse, a corridor runs outward like a processional walk, ending in a window cut into stone. Through it, the sea appears as a blue wall. When a swell passes beyond, light bends through the opening and travels the nave in 3 braided bands. Red, gold, blue, separating and reuniting across the floor. In earlier chapters, we saw sunlight drink into towers. Here it learns to kneel. Color approaches the platform, rests upon the bowl, and unthreads itself into pale. The room hushes a little more, as if satisfied a ritual it does not explain has been observed. In a niche to the right of the crossing, the narrator finds a plaque. Its face is near featureless, but under grazing light letters lift. Not Greek, not Latin alone. A braided script with curls like tide and stems like reed. Only a few words stand clear enough to claim: water, choir, keep, remember. The same small vocabulary that followed us through gates and maps and bells. Memory favors short words. The sea prefers vowels. There is no icon, no saint, no body. The cathedral was never made to be seen by eyes. It was tuned for breath. Perhaps, before the water came, people gathered here to cool their days, to listen to wind coax patience from vaults, to drink shade, to learn how to return home without burning. Perhaps the sea took what it loved, not in anger but in adoption. In Aristeas's notebook, now a salt-smudged friend, a line returns. There are architectures that descend to survive. Some carry their light with them. This one carried its silence. On the final dive, the weather turns again. A surface line lifts and trembles like a string. The team agrees on minutes instead of hours. The narrator moves once more along the nave, slow as a pilgrim. At the threshold, they pause and turn. For a heartbeat, a shape gathers where the ribs converge. Not a vision, not a person, merely the suggestion of an absence shaped like welcome. Then the surge draws its veil and the room resumes its elderly patience. They ascend into a surface stippled by rain. On deck, the instruments spit columns. Salinity, turbidity, a tidy ledger that will not mention the hush that steadied the heart. In the log, the narrator writes what can be written: dimensions, bearings, fragments, tones. Then, a smaller line meant for later. Perhaps the cathedral does not ask to be explained. Perhaps it asks to be kept in the way one keeps a promise, by breathing more slowly when one remembers it. Night comes fast on the Laconian Strait. The boat rocks against the pier. A lantern coughs and takes. The water darkens, and then, as if answering where no question was asked, a low chord hums through the hull, steady as a sleeping lung. The sea, patient chorister, is practicing. Perhaps the cathedral was never meant to be found, only to teach the finding of quiet enough to hear. There are journeys that do not end, only soften. They turn inward, like tides retreating not in defeat but in reverence. The story of Atlantis was never about loss. It was about remembering the shape of silence, the sacred rhythm between rise and return. In his logbook he wrote, "The sea is ringing in harmony." As the expedition winds to its close, the narrator stands on the deck of the Orphean II. The sea is calm, a mirror holding the dim afterglow of dawn. Around the vessel drift traces of phosphorescence, pale constellations awakening beneath the surface, as if the ocean itself were breathing light. Somewhere below, in corridors long surrendered to coral, the echoes of towers, bells, and voices still linger. The water hums faintly, tuned to an ancient chord. In the logbook, pages flutter in the wind like the wings of seabirds. Each entry is both map and prayer. The map that led back to Atlantis, the city beneath the tides, the bells that sang once, the cathedral beneath the waves. Together they form not a route, but a spiral, a pilgrimage of remembering. For every descent, there was a call upward. For every ruin, a rhythm. The sea, patient and cyclical, has always been our oldest teacher. The narrator writes slowly, as if carving into breath itself. Perhaps Atlantis was never lost. Perhaps it merely changed frequency, folded itself into the resonance of water, waiting for those who still listen. Night falls without edges. The horizon dissolves into a single line of silver, and in that line, the stars appear like answers too old to need language. The hum of the engines quiets. Even technology seems to bow to the deeper pulse beneath it. Somewhere far below, a current shifts, soft, deliberate, as if something vast has turned in its sleep. Memories rise like bubbles from depth. The salt-burned parchment that trembled under glass, the oracles of dust, the towers that cooled sunlight into patience. All fragments of one immense architecture. A civilization that understood endurance not as conquest, but as surrender. They built not to last, but to remain within the rhythm of return. And that, perhaps, is why parts of them still sing. Aristides once wrote, "The sea is a mirror that remembers." Standing above it now, the narrator understands. To remember is not to look backward, but to breathe with the same rhythm as what was. Atlantis was not a city, it was a tempo of being, a calibration of soul to current. As sleep approaches, the mind drifts between clarity and dream. The water and the air become indistinguishable. The deck, the vessel, the body, all feel suspended, buoyed by something older than gravity. The ocean becomes a lullaby, and the stars, reflections of submerged lanterns. From the eastern edge, light rises. Not sun yet, but the promise of it. The wind carries a scent of salt and copper, the same air that once moved through marble halls and crystal plazas. The first gull circles, silent. The horizon exhales. And in that moment, before waking or surrender, the listener hears it. Faint but steady, the breath between worlds. The sound of the planet remembering its own heartbeat. He never published his findings. Perhaps that is the true map. Not parchment, not stone, but pulse. Perhaps Atlantis was never beneath us, but within the rhythm that lulls us to rest. The sea does not end. It folds. The story does not close. It inhales. Somewhere, beneath miles of water and centuries of forgetting, the towers of light still shimmer. They are not waiting to be found. They are waiting to be remembered. And the ocean, ancient, lucid, infinite, whispers once more, "Return." Years later, divers near the same coordinates reported hearing the same distant toll, as if from a submerged tower calling no one. The narrator guides us into that abyss. Imagine descending past the reach of sunlight, through layers of sapphire and shadow, where even the color blue dissolves. There, amid the black calm of the deep, the bells begin. Not made of metal, but of resonance itself. Each tone seems to awaken something in the water, vibrations gliding along basalt ridges carved by time. When recorded and accelerated, the frequencies resemble human chant. Slow, monastic, as if a sunken choir still marked the hours of a world now forgotten. Historians of the sea have always spoken of drowned sanctuaries. Off the coast of Cornwall lies Lyoness, said to have vanished beneath the tide with all its churches still ringing. In Brittany, peasants once claimed to hear the bells of Wyes toll at low tide. And in the Gulf of Cadiz, near Tartessos, divers have reported metallic echoes when the currents shift, sounds that fade when approached. Every culture that lived near water carries a legend of something beneath it that still remembers. The scientists aboard the Eurydice II retrieved fragments from the ridge floor, encrusted slabs, partly metallic, partly calcified. Within one, they found traces of an alloy similar to orichalcum, the mysterious copper-gold metal mentioned by Plato. This composition was close to brass, yet richer, warmer. Tests at the University of Lisbon confirmed it could produce harmonic vibration when struck. But when Duval returned to the site a year later, the bells had fallen silent. The readings vanished, as if the ocean, aware of being listened to, had drawn its breath inward once again. There is a tenderness in that silence. Perhaps what lies below is not a ruin, but a memory. A city that never died, only dissolved into sound. The water has preserved its rhythm, carrying it like a heartbeat across centuries. The tolls are not calls of warning or sorrow, but reminders that even what vanishes continues to vibrate, invisibly, through everything alive. In the archives of the Portuguese Navy rests an old reel labeled Som do Abismo. When played, it reveals a faint pattern, a single chime repeated 12 times, then stillness. 12 tolls, as if marking the passage of a forgotten hour. No one can say if the recording is authentic, yet those who have heard it describe a peculiar feeling, as though their pulse slows, aligning with something vast. A rhythm older than sleep. As night deepens, the listener floats between waking and dreaming. The bells echo again, not from a distance now, but from within. It is the sound of the earth's crust flexing, of molten chambers murmuring beneath miles of salt and silence. Yet it feels deliberate, sacred, a message not meant for discovery, but remembrance. The sea keeps many altars, some built of coral, some of basalt, some of breath. Perhaps Atlantis did not vanish. It changed its form, becoming pure frequency, resonating through the bones of the ocean. The bells beneath the waves are its language, its prayer, its proof of persistence. When the tide turns and the wind falls quiet, that song drifts upward again. And for a moment, if one listens not with ears but with stillness, the ocean becomes a cathedral without walls, the same one Duval heard half a century ago. The final image lingers softly, a diver suspended in blue-black silence, head tilted toward the abyss, waiting. Below him, a shimmer, then a sound, the lowest note of the earth, slow as memory, vast as forgiveness. Perhaps the sea is not mourning what was lost. Perhaps it is reminding us that nothing ever truly stops ringing. There are ruins that do not belong to any single age. They rise in silence, nameless, their stones older than memory itself. One such circle stands in the middle of the Sahara, half buried in ochre dust, its shadow stretching like an hour that never ends. Nomads call it Bab al-Shams al-Nasiya, the gate of forgotten suns. From afar, it looks like a ring of standing pillars, their surfaces scorched smooth by centuries of wind. But when dawn spills across them, their edges catch light in a way that feels deliberate, almost ceremonial, as if the desert itself is performing an ancient ritual of remembrance. It was rediscovered in 1933 by a French archaeologist named Émile Dufresne during a survey of prehistoric trade routes near Tassili and Ager. He described the site as impossibly aligned to stars that no longer exist. The stones form an ellipse, 40 meters across, oriented not toward the present sunrise, but toward the rising point of a vanished constellation. The same pattern was found in petroglyphs at Nabta and in obsidian fragments near the Sahel, linking cultures thousands of years apart. But Dufresne believed this circle was older than language, older than story. At twilight, he noted that the pillars glowed faintly, not from reflection, but from the desert's own breath, as if heat and memory had become the same element. No inscriptions, no carvings, only silence, deep as prayer. Local Tuareg guides refused to camp nearby, saying the ground remembers light too clearly. The narrator stands before the gate now, centuries later. The desert hums with low wind, and the pillars cut shadows across the sand like ancient sundials marking a time that never returns. Each pillar bears a single perfect hole, not drilled, but melted, as though the stone had once softened beneath an immense brightness. Through those apertures, the setting sun passes once a year, casting lines of fire across the sand in a perfect spiral.